Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jay Michaels with you again here at PhoenixFearCon.com. Phoenix FearCon Film Festival Online is virtual this year, and we have a bevy of guests that are going to tell us all about the great genre of horror. Now, we talk about movies a lot, we talk about TV a lot, we talk about the actors and all of that a lot, but where's the foundation? What's that first level? Now, we spoke to a theatrical company about the days of the theater of horror, when they put plays on stage, and how it eventually became Hammer Films and so many other of the things we love. When you get right down to it, the Grand Guignol is another way of saying slasher film. But there was even more of a foundation to that, and that is the horror writer, the horror novelist. And we have two incredible horror novelists with us. We have John Skipp, and we have Owl Goingback. These two award winners have creeped us out, literally, and that's not easy to say, innumerably. Gents, Owl, let's start with you. Tell us about yourself, please. Introduce yourself.
Hi there, Al Goingback. I've been writing for about 30 years, maybe a little bit longer. I've done a dozen or so novels, a ton of short stories, some screenplays, poetry, children's books, magazine articles, anything that pays the rent, basically. I primarily do horror and fantasy because I just love scaring the crap out of people. I've won a couple awards. I won 2 Stoker Awards, one for Best Novel, one for First Novel, and I've also won the HWA Lifetime Achievement Award for my career as a horror writer.
I'm sorry, I got stuck on writing children's books.
I've written 2 children's books for the Wright Group, which is now owned by McGraw-Hill. It's an educational publisher. So I've got nice little happy kids books in schools, and I do the scary stuff for adults. And I hope the parents of the kids who read my children's books never find out about the rest of the stuff I write.
I would thank you. I was about to say the same thing. I could just see the parent coming in there. Hi, Mr. Goingback. Did you write this one about the wolf that rips open the man's heart? I'm just wondering. John, tell us all about you.
Well, my name's John, and I'm an alcoholic. Let's see. I am probably best known as one of the troublemaking splatterpunk kids from the 1980s, where a guy named Craig Spector and I wrote a bunch of books like The Light at the End and The Scream and The Bridge, and edited the very first anthology of post-Romero zombie fiction called Book of the Dead, which basically created the literary zombie movement as we do it today. So I get bragging rights as a zombie godfather. And in the many, many years since, I've written a number of books, more books this century than in the previous century. And from horror to bizarro to social satire and Twilight Zonian crime. And I've written a bunch of screenplays, most of which have not been produced. I wrote and directed a segment of the movie Tales of Halloween with my partner, Andrew Cash. And I recently had an episode co-written with my friend, Dory Miller, in the first season of Creepshow, a story called Times is Tough in Muskie Holler. In the pandemic, I have been writing music. I've probably written and recorded and composed about 4 hours of music, like 4 albums worth of shit. And that's been mostly keeping me busy, but I still get the occasional insane short story out. I just wrote a 400-word cosmic horror story for the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival, and have a big, incredibly autobiographical horror story called The Inward Eye, coming out in a couple of weeks from Simon & Schuster and Shudder, the TV streaming network, and for a book called Video Palace. And yeah, so And I could tell you a million other things, but enough about me.
No, no, no. Tell me more. You use the word Godfather. Godfather, we can use on you many times. You talk about the Godfather of zombie fiction. You're also the Godfather of splatter punk. What is that? Great word. What is it?
Oh, it's a hilarious word coined by David J. Scow, who would also be the godfather of splatterpunk and who named it at the World Fantasy Convention. I believe it was 1988 in Rhode Island. There was this phenomenon going on with these new writers who were writing, let's say, more visceral and immediate sexual, violent, subversive, troublemaking fiction. Guys like myself and Craig Spector, David J. Scow, Clive Barker, Joe R. Lansdale, and they were discussing at the bar what we should be named. And Scow says, "Oh, they'll probably call us splatterpunk," and everybody laughed. And then within an hour, it was all over the convention, and within a couple of months, we were in the Village Voice and Penthouse Magazine and all these other places where discriminating literature buffs convene. And so, yeah, so I've been bespackled with that moniker ever since. But I think that funny names for literary movements are swell, and I don't have a problem with it.
It's funny you say bespackled. It seems to have. It seems to have come out the same time as the slasher film. Now, we spoke about that on Terror TV. Did one influence the other? Do they walk hand in hand? Do they look over each other's shoulders? Splatterpunk and the slasher film.
I am not a big fan of slasher films. To me, they're not that interesting because disposable teens being marginally creatively dispatched by faceless bugaboos are not my jam. But I would say that George Romero's Dead films, the movies of John Carpenter and David Cronenberg, and just basically button pushing. Again, people talk about the splat as in wet meat spray, but I think the punk, which is the subversive, troublemaking, dance and fuck with the lights on element, is at least, if not more important, at least in terms of what I'd like to be remembered for, which is being a subversive who dances and fucks with the lights on.
That's okay. That's great. I'd like that myself. I can't do it, but I'm just gonna say, that's great. Now I digress. Very, very recently, and I can't believe I didn't know this. One of my favorite horror films of that era was Fright Night. And when I was in Summerstock once, and there was nothing to do, and I went to a store and I bought the paperback edition of it, and of course I was reading it, loved it, thought it was well written, the whole works, thought it was even better than the movie in so many ways. And I just recently, as I was preparing for this, I looked down, and there you are. You wrote the novelization. You wrote the novelization of Fright Night.
Yes. When The Light at the End got purchased, there was a 1.5 year lag between when it was purchased and when it came out. And our agents were like, well, we should get you some work while we're waiting. Want to do film novelizations? And so he solicited gigs for us. And one of the scripts that we got was Fright Night. The other script that we got was The Bride, the movie that wound up starring Sting. And we thought that was really fascinating. And they took one look at our work and said, But the Fright Night guys loved us, and we immediately got the gig. We had 1 month to write it because the movie was about to come out. And they needed to time the release with the release of the film for maximum bang per buck value. And so we had to blast that sucker down. But it was really fun to write. And the big thing was getting Columbia Pictures to send us photographs, stills of the film, so that we could know what it would look like, because it had already been shot and it was in post-production at the time. And so they sent the stills. We saw that the makeup effects were superb. We got to know what the faces were, so we could actually describe the people like what they looked like, and then blasted it out. And we had a lot of fun, particularly with Evil Ed, who was our favorite character, and did a lot of expansive work on him that the guys at Columbia said, man, we wish you had written this book before we shot, because that would have been cool. But yeah, Josh Mellerman recently just went online and said that this was his favorite novelization, and that when you read it, it felt like the source material for the book, as opposed to a bizarre sideways marketing spinoff. And that's a nice piece of praise.
I'm so glad you said that, because at that point, this is going back more years, and I didn't know, trajectories and things like I do now, and I thought it was the novel that made the movie, if you will. And your descriptions of the characters were exquisite. I remember there was one character who comes back to life. He's eviscerated and he comes back to life, and you called him the Billy Thing. And I still remember that the Billy Thing came back, and I thought, that's brilliant. So I was very impressed. So I'm thrilled to hear that you became the de facto source material with it. Now, Owl, speaking of source material, you have the distinction of being the, or one of the only Native American horror authors. And you infuse your work with actual legends and spirituality. How's that going?
Well, it's great, because you always write about what you know. And I was raised up on the traditional Native American stories. And when I was growing up, for books, all I saw were, vampires and werewolves and everything who incorporated European legends. And there was nobody incorporating Native American legends. And we've got some wonderful monsters in our folklore. So I was like, well, let me do something. So I started writing with incorporating some of the legends and making up my own as I went along. But I wanted to tell the books from a Native American viewpoint, because, we have a way of looking at the world differently than other people do. I wanted to incorporate that by usually putting a Native American in a story and having a protagonist as a white guy, and you have them as partners, so they could learn the difference in the cultures. Because a lot of people, what they fear with other cultures, if they don't know them, when you don't understand something, there's always fear. And during that, when I first started out, people didn't really understand the native cultures. They weren't being promoted. Nobody's trying to discover that. And to me, it was part of the history of this country. I've always said, if you're born in this country, you're Native American. I mean, you have a right to that history too, even though you're not belong to that particular tribe. You should know it. And the elders are always about teaching, about sharing. So I've always considered myself a traditional storyteller. I would do a terrifying story with somebody getting ripped apart by a huge monster, but I'd put a lot of the teachings in there, respect your elders, respect your land. And it was like how my ancestors used to teach the children. They would throw a story out, and they still do it today. They wouldn't write it down, they throw it out there, and the teaching lesson was in the story. And if you paid attention, you got the lesson. If you didn't, well, it's too bad, because they're not going to sit there and write it down for you to memorize. In fact, my books, Crota and some of the other books, are being used in a Orange County Correctional Facility for that very same reason, for a youthful offender program. They didn't know I was local, because that's in Orlando, and I got this package from the jail. And the first thought was, what the hell do my kids do now? And I opened it up, and there's these little convicts and stuff. These 15-year-old kids are in the jail for armed robbery and murder and everything else, and they're holding my books. So it was an 8-week course. It was they read my novel, they write a report on it, and if they keep their nose clean during that time, they're rewarded by their families coming in with a home-cooked meal, and they had this celebration. I thought, wait a minute, you got some teenage kid in jail without his family, going through this traumatic experience, and he gets a home-cooked meal for reading my crap? I said, that's wonderful.
That
so
is beautiful.
I've actually gone down to the jail a couple times and talked to these kids, and I've sat there with them, and they were absolutely brilliant. They gave me the best questions. They got more out of the story than anybody, but they just screwed up in their life because nobody got to them quick enough. And when they were walking out of the room, these 14 and 15-year-olds, the jailer's like, well, that kid's in for armed robbery. He's going to prison. That kid's in for murder. He's going to prison. Nobody got to him when they needed to be gotten to. There wasn't that elder giving them teaching stories when they needed teaching stories. Nobody put their arm around them. And that's what I've been trying to do with the books I write. It's great to scare people. It's great to share the culture. But if I could educate people, whether they like it or not, it's even better.
That is beautiful.
So you're almost looking at it in the same way the Greek tragedies did, that we're infusing this spirituality. So there's a lesson to be learned at the end.
Exactly. And when I did my first novel, Crota, which won the Bram Stoker Award for Best First Novel, it's about a large creature the size of a grizzly. It's a prehistoric creature who loves to hunt and kill for the pure pleasure of killing, because man's the only creature on the planet that hunts for sport. I said, well, what if something like that did the same? And then I incorporated all Indian tribal legends around it, real legends, just so I could share those. Well, I did a too good a job, because everybody who ever wrote a review of Crota said it's a Native American legend, and it's not. I made it up. In fact, I had a couple come up to me in a powwow in North Florida and asked me if it was a real legend. I'm like, why? They said, well, we saw it. I'm like, well, you saw the Crota? Yeah, we saw it. I said, you sure you saw the Crota? They said, well, we felt its presence. And it broke my heart to tell them that I made it up. But then I was like, but there's other things in the woods. Maybe you saw a skunk ape or something. But they believed it was a real legend. And because of that, the book's actually been ripped off by one of the largest gaming companies in the world. They've got a game extension pack called The Crota's Lair about a prehistoric creature on the moon, when my book was about a prehistoric creature living in an ancient city underground. So I think they ripped it off because they thought it was also a Indian legend and fair use. Yeah. And I can't go after them. They got billions. I don't.
Right.
So can you capitalize on that? Yes, you can't sue them, because $1 million later you'll still be in court. Yeah. But can you capitalize on that at all? Can you take, I hate to use the term, can you take credit for that game?
No, I haven't. What's kind of hurt me is when they came out with it. Used to be when you looked up Crota online and Googled it, my name came up in my book. Now you look up Crota, their stuff pops up. And then there's another person who wrote a book based on their game system illegally, and it's on Amazon. So now there's 2 books on Amazon and Crota. So I'm like, so I can't capitalize, but I can't fight them either unless somebody comes along and represents me for free. Because just I don't have that kind of money. They'll nickel and dime me to death.
You can't ask them to just like put your name somewhere on a credit or on the box or something.
Yeah, so, I've never approached them. I mean, I even went into a store and saw the Crota little vinyl pop figure, which broke my heart. It's like, whoa, I made this name up. I mean, I had originally wanted to call it Croton and tied it in with the whole Lost Colony thing, but I said, no, that's too cliched. So I shortened it, just made it Crota. That's how I came up with the name. But now they've got a whole system on it.
Wow. I guess it's a very nice pat on the back that your work was so authentic that they thought it was public domain and thousands of years old or whatever. But at the same point, hey, where's the paycheck?
Exactly. Well, writers today, as soon as our stuff's published, we're ripped off by websites, Russian websites, and things like that. So it's just another case of having my stuff stolen. So I've gotten used to it.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Now you mentioned your novels, which are horror novels, are in prisons to teach them a lesson. Why do you think the horror novel was there? Why not something historic? Why not something more current or topical? Why did they pick the horror novel?
Well, when you're dealing with that age group, I mean, it's why we read horror novels, to be entertained. I mean, it was a book they would actually read. A lot of people won't read nonfiction, but people read stories, especially if you do an action story. My books, I always call them bus stop books or airplane books. They're very fast reads. I write at a lower level. I don't use big words because a lot of my readers are, I have women write me, say their husbands don't read, but they love my stuff. And because I try to keep it down at a lower level, because unfortunately that's how the education system is today. Mm. I tease people. I say, well, I don't use big words because I don't know any. So
I wouldn't say lower level. In reading your thing, in reading your materials, I get the Rod Serling feel. Like the message is coming through. It's coming through real easy. There's a spoonful of sugar there, so we get the message very easy. We don't have to stop and try to figure it out. We learn quickly. So I guess I guess that's what it is, you know.
Well, it amazes me. I say lower level. I'm speaking how we are today compared to somebody who wrote in the 1800s.
Oh,
If you read like a journal from a Civil War soldier writing home, they're eloquent, they're amazing, but we don't talk that way, and we sure don't write that way anymore. And a lot of people don't read that way, and so I try to keep it simple for them.
I would use the word accessible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Definitely accessible. And you both are, in reading your works, again, both of you, it's like the message comes through. There's humor in there, which I think if a horror movie doesn't have humor, then it's just wrong. But the message comes through in your novels. The humor comes through there, even if it's ironic humor somewhere. And we really get a taste of the story, and you both creep me out something fierce. So you do a great job with that. Let me be a fanboy for a moment. Movie versions. Have there been film versions or negotiations of film versions of your works?
Not yet. I've had negotiations and I've had options, but nothing's ever happened. I have the heartbreak story. I'm the typical bad luck writer. I was in negotiations with a Hollywood studio. I had George Romero on board to direct a movie version of my novel, Evil Whispers. George wanted to be his next project, said he could do it for $5 million. Now, it took 5 months to set up this meeting. And during this 5 months, the producer from this studio, which I won't name, hadn't read the script yet. So we had the conference call, and he said he hadn't read the script. He needs a weekend to read it. I'm like, all right, fine. So he said, I'll call you on Monday. He calls my agent on Tuesday, said, look, I need another week to read this. I mean, instead of saying with Romero, I'll do it, $5 million, I got George freaking Romero on the phone. He's willing to do this. This guy obviously didn't know who Romero was. So the guy took another week, and during that week that he took, the writer's strike hit. It killed all negotiations. I couldn't talk to George. His movie Diary of the Dead premiered at the Toronto Film Festival. It was a huge hit. Weinstein's brothers snapped it up and wanted a sequel. My deal was blown out of the water because his producer couldn't read a script in 5 months and couldn't say over the phone, hey, George Romero, $5 million, sure, I'll make my money back on rentals of DVDs. But I've come that close and breaks your heart and nothing happens.
There's the business end of being the real horror story. John, how about you? I remember chatting with you about a short story you did about a clown that was kidnapped, and I thought that would make the most incredible episode of any kind of terror series or whatever. How about you? What's the horror story of film versions of your work?
Oh, dude, you got all day. I mean, okay. I met George Romero for the first time on the telephone because he wanted to make The Light at the End, our punk vampire in the subways novel that was our first novel that was a New York Times bestseller and took me from being a street messenger in New York to having a career. And George calls up because he wanted to direct this film. George wanted to direct a lot of films. George died with hundreds of unproduced screenplays that he wrote and couldn't get made. George got hosed. You want to talk about somebody whose property was marketed and capitalized on, and he didn't see a fucking dime? Let's talk about George. Let's talk about the Walking Dead. Let's talk about every zombie movie that has been made ever since. George and John Russo got hosed big time. I actually appeared and almost did the soundtrack for the remake of Night of the Living Dead that they managed to make, that Tom Savini directed from a script by George. And they got that thing financed. They made a $4 million film. $1 million went to producing the film. The other $3 million went to everybody who got hosed on the distribution of the original Night of the Living Dead and never saw a dime. It's a pretty good movie. Great zombie effects, and I play a zombie and a biker making fun of zombies, and that was really swell. I got to hang out with George a bunch, but yeah, that dude got so totally hosed. I mean, his career just makes me weep, and he's one of my heroes, one of my authentic heroes. Aside from, and that movie, Light at the End, he never got to make that one either. But in the course of talking with him on the phone, I'm at Craig Spector's house, and we're talking. This was before cell phones, so I'm on this long corded phone, wall phone, with this huge, and I'm just pacing around, and I'm smoking a joint and talking with him, and all of a sudden I'm like, I get this idea, and I'm like, George, what if we did a book about everything else that was happening in the world when the dead started getting up? And George said, well, I don't think anybody would give a shit, but as long as you don't use any of our characters or scenes from the movies, then my producers wouldn't sue you. And I said, great. And I immediately contacted Stephen King and Scow and Lansdale and all these other people and said, you want to write Romero-style zombie stories? And they're all like, yeah. So that's how that thing came about. And George said, if you get this book published, I will eat my hat. So he claimed that he put spaghetti sauce on a Pittsburgh Steelers hat and devoured it. I have no proof. Meanwhile, pretty much all of my early books had been optioned at one point or another. Light at the End was optioned like 7 times, and it never got made. Finally, Animals, the very last of the Skipp Inspector books, was made into a film. It's a complete piece of shit that fell off the face of the earth for good reason. If you ever get a chance to see it, don't. It's just god awful. Craig and I wound up writing the screenplay, the original screenplay for Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. Another screenwriter was hired at the same time in clear violation of the legalities of the business. We handed in our script, he handed in his script. They liked our script, they hated his, so they fired us and hired him to rewrite it. 6 writers and 13 drafts later, the piece of shit they evidently wanted to make was released as Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, thereby souring my experience with Hollywood dramatically, but I still moved here or moved there. I don't live there anymore. And jumped through as many flaming hoops as I could bear. That said, my short novel Conscience was picked up by Josh Mallerman's production company with Ryan Lewis, Spin a Black Yarn, and a company called Atlas TV out of Detroit. And we're trying to get that made. I wrote the script. I lived on that script for the last year and a half. And so, and I have, I love to direct. I've directed short films and music videos, and I love to direct. And I have a feature film called Doppelbanger that I'm hoping that I hoped I would have been shooting in Detroit by now, but then COVID landed and put the kibosh on that. But I wrote all the music for it. It is a horror, bizarro black comedy about a really nice guy with a lonely guy with a terrifying doppelganger, and this really hot, damaged, dangerous woman with the world's nicest doppelganger. And I've written 16 songs and like 13 additional pieces of soundtrack music for it. I got all these visuals. I'm just dying to go and make that thing. Hope springs eternal in the motion picture kingdom. I don't like Hollywood, but I love movies, and I love working with actors and good producers, which do exist, and with special effects people and stunt people and set designers and art directors. And I love the people. Some of the best time I've ever had is on film sets. So I have no bias against the medium. I just don't like the machine.
When I left the corporate world some years ago and saw an old colleague, she said, "Well, do you miss us?" And I said, "I miss all of you. I don't miss the job." So yeah, it seems the same way there. Now, you both said an interesting word. You both said optioned. Your works were optioned. Uh, I've heard many times from different writers that you can live very comfortably on being optioned and never have anything produced.
A lot of people do. There are a lot of people who are still somehow being able to live in Los Angeles with its exorbitant through the roof prices just on shit that will never get made. And that's really, really fascinating. As the great screenwriter and novelist William Goldman said, if you want to work in Hollywood as a screenwriter, you better have something else that gives you actual pleasure, because you may make a lot of money, but you will get almost nobody gets genuine satisfaction from being a screenwriter in Hollywood. Personally, I would rather pump gas.
Okay. And nowadays, I think that's getting to be one of the more lucrative professions, actually.
People still need gas.
Let me tell you. So I asked both of you on this sense. Let's try to find the happy ending to some of the horror stories that you've been telling us. Have you both received options? Have you both lived okay on options? It's more educational. The authors out there going, well, what do you mean you can be optioned but never produced? Have you had those situations? You've said your works have been optioned. Have you?
They've been optioned, not for, I haven't got a big chunk of money for it, but I got enough to pay bills for a year or so. I mean, I know a science fiction writer who had his work option. He made like $300,000 a year for 3 years. I mean, I haven't got that range, but it's, money spends. So you go out and you buy yourself something for the office, some toy, and you pay a few bills and you be happy because you just, you're selling, if you option it again and again, you're getting paid for the same stuff over and over. That's my theory of life. If I keep selling the same crap year after year, the same books over and over, I never have to write anything new. So I can be as lazy as I want to be.
And I have never, options, options are nice, but they have never carried me. Getting hired to write the actual script for Conscience was a different deal. And if it goes into production and is a several $1,000,000 film as it is intended to be, then I'll make some bank. Then I'll make some serious bank. But yeah, like I said, I've lived for a year and a half just off the first draft of the script. I haven't even done my second draft yet because everybody liked the first draft.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it's really fascinating how things work. And yeah, I mean, very, very few people make like serious living money, like even like really good middle class income money off of writing books. But a film, because those guys, are pissing money, those can be game-changing events when they happen. And yeah, it's all very fascinating. And I do know people who have sustained screenwriting careers and are actually happy people as well. But money does not equal happiness. I know a lot of people who've made a lot of money in this stuff and just want to kill themselves every day. And I know people who just happily write their crazy stories, sell them occasionally, get a book out here and there, and are substantially happier people because they're not crawling face first through dog shit every day. It's all very interesting. And I need to circle back to having characters ripped off. After Skipp and Spectre went through its crash and burn phase, and I had to sort of crawl back to life, I got a job at this company called the Transcription Company, and I was basically, I was the dubbing guy. Well, we would get all this media generated by talk shows and movies that needed translating or subtitling and all this kind of stuff, and I was the dubber. And one day I was working in there, and a young man who worked at the company came up to me with this book called the Buffy, the Vampire Slayer Handbook or something like that, opens it up, and there's a picture of me and Spectre in it, wearing our Mickey Mouse gloves and waving goofily, and giant inflatable, 3-fingered gloves or whatever. And evidently, the character of Spike was the punk vampire Spike from Buffy, was inspired by Rudy Pascoe, the punk vampire in our novel, The Light at the End. And honestly, I don't feel ripped off at all by that, because Spike is not Rudy, but he is a punk vampire, so they totally took our thing. But I think what happened was Joss Whedon read the book and went, oh, this is fucking cool. I got to do something like this. And he didn't build the whole foundation of his mythology on it. He just took so I consider it a homage as opposed to an ass screaming. I think it's kind of lovely that happened. That, the weird thing is, when you are able to influence the culture in a way that that helps, or that makes life better for the people who enjoy it, then that's kind of a win. I didn't make money off of helping create zombie literature. I didn't make any money off of Spike, but I got paid for the things that I did, and I get paid by the dividends of people who, 30 years later are like, oh, I love this book, or I love that thing, or I published a zombie. When the last thing that George Romero released in his life was a short story collection he did with Jonathan Mayberry called Nights of the Living Dead, which was basically a bunch of writers writing what else happened on that night. So basically he was taking that Book of the Dead template, but he was getting to edit it with Jonathan, who's a fine writer in the field. And they asked me to do a story, and I did. And then I get the book, and they dedicated it to me. George and Jonathan dedicated it to me, and I was like, so, you take the joy where you find it, I guess is all I'm trying to say.
I have to agree with you. Maybe my landlord and the electric company don't, but I completely agree with you to be connected to that. You talk about George Romero. You both mentioned George Romero. There's the story, I don't know how apocryphal it is, but that the original print, if you will, of Night of the Living Dead had a different title. He copyrighted. I'm sorry, what was it?
Night of the Ghouls.
Night of the Ghouls. He copywrote it as Night of the Ghouls, but he never initially copywrote it as Night of the Living Dead. And supposedly, as the story goes, someone, because of copyright laws and whatever, his film was shown all over the world, and he never got a penny up until a certain point, because he did not own the copyright on the movie The Night of the Living Dead. He owned it on Night of the Ghouls. So
it's very interesting. They just signed a really, really bad distribution deal. They got hosed, flat out. They really did. That movie became a cult sensation and started showing all over the place. And they weren't seeing a dime for it. They just signed a really bad deal. And whether that bad deal entailed the renaming of the film or not, I am not sure. He should still have gotten directing credit.
Oh, of course.
Which he did. That movie's in the fucking Smithsonian. That movie is an American classic, a 20th century classic film that redefined the genre. I would say between Night of the Living Dead and Targets, Peter Bogdanovich's film Targets, where Boris Karloff, the old horror actor of traditional Gothic horror films, meets the serial killer or the mass murderer who's sniping from the water tower. Those are the two films, I think, that defined the break between the old horror and the new horror.
Completely. Completely. Romero even.
16, maybe.
There's so many. They talk about how the parables of Night of the Living Dead have so much in terms of racial inequality and the underpinnings of that. And it's, you know, yes, okay, I'm sure his landlord doesn't care either, but when you say George Romero, we're saying it with great reverence.
Well, Georgia told me at a convention on with the Night of the Living Dead, is the distributor, when they sent it out, they had left the copyright notice off the film that was originally on there. That may have been when they changed the title, but
Yep.
there wasn't a copyright notice, and that's why everybody ripped it off, because the distributor had left that off the film print.
And
We fucked up like left and right.
yeah, really.
You can take something that great and blow it that hard.
Legal issues and copyright issues. It's very easy to take a Rembrandt and make it anything else. Owl, quick question to you, and elaborate as much as you want, because I'm fascinated by this. You infuse in Native American spirituality and myth and things like that. Do you ever have backlash from it? Talking about, you know, the foundations of work about creating mythology. Has anyone ever said to you, how dare you do this to our culture or something like that?
I'm waiting for it, especially the way the society is today. I mean, for 30 years, nobody's had a problem with it. I've always checked with the elders first. I made sure when I do ceremonies in a story, I don't do them word for word how you would actually do the ceremony. I don't put stuff in my book concerning ceremonies that I haven't seen in print somewhere else. So I don't give away tribal secrets. I don't give away sacred ceremonies. But there's still, the way society is today, people bitch if you wear Hawaiian shirts. I know it's just going to be a matter of time before I'm in somebody's target, before somebody's offended by it. But for my entire childhood growing up, that's what the elders wanted you to do. They wanted you to share the knowledge. They wanted the culture shared. When you did oral stories back in the day, the traditional stories, the tribes would share them to each other. And it wasn't like, oh, this is mine, you can't use it. No, you give your story out to people. You share that with them. That's what writing was about for me. I'm sharing the culture. I'm sharing the stories. Now, you know, I'm sure somebody's going to come along in the society we have now, which is, you know, people got to bitch about everything. If you wear Hawaiian, if you wear a kimono, so I'm sure somebody's gonna throw a rock at me sooner or later. I mean, the world's changed. Everybody's gotten ugly lately, especially on social media. But so far, I haven't been attacked. But you know, we don't know what tomorrow will bring. It's very possible.
Any elders, if you will, ever get offended saying, "Why'd you make a horror story?
No,
Why couldn't you write an adventure?"
They know what I'm doing, and I'm trying to share something, and I'm trying to put the teachings out there, and I'm doing it old style storytelling. All the ones I've talked to so far, they've liked the stories, or they've liked the children's books. When I did Eagle Feathers, which was one of my children's books, the young character in it was Kiowa. Now, I'm not Kiowa, but I knew one of the chairmen of the tribe, and I wanted to use the boy Kiowa because their culture was so amazing and the regalia they had back in the day. So I approached him. I said, look, I want to do this story. And he was fine with it. He liked it so much. They put a copy in one of the museums, a copy of the book. But I told the publisher, I said, look, this is an illustrated children's book. We will make sure every part of the illustration is accurate, because if it's not, I'm a dead man. I can't go to powwows anymore. They'll be after me. So I worked with the artist showing moccasin designs of beadwork, and it's accurate. It really is amazing, because most children's books are not accurate when they talk about Indian culture. I wanted to have something that not only was out there where I'm sharing my story, but I was honoring the Kiowa tribe by making the character one of theirs.
Beautiful.
Any other? Now I've been calling you the horror novelist, the only Native American horror novelist. Am I exaggerating? Are there others, or are you?
There are others who are making a hell of a lot more money than I am. There's I think Stephen Graham Jones, who is really hot right now.
Yes.
I believe he's Blackfoot. He has got a PhD about. He's a writing instructor. He's got about 30 books under his credit. And there's a lady
He's
who's
a beautiful dude too. Great guy.
Yeah, so you know, he's out there doing it. I'm probably one of the early ones, and I hope that, you know, when I came along, nobody wanted stories from people of color. Nobody wanted anything Native American. I had to kick a lot of doors down and scratch and fight for every step. And I hope that some of the things I did 30 years ago are beneficial to the new writers coming along, because now they're getting a lot of offers that wasn't available before. They're being noticed. They're getting some great deals, and I hope I contributed a little bit to that.
You did.
Because you're Native American, that people just didn't want to deal with your work? They didn't want to deal with you? Seriously?
They didn't understand Native American culture. They didn't even want me to use my name. They wanted me to pick another name. I had to fight for everything. When I did the children's book, I tried to do them done as traditional stories. And I went round and round with the editor. She kept wanting me to date the story. And I kept trying to explain to her, I said, ma'am, you don't understand. A traditional oral story is not dated. I'm writing this as an oral story to be told. And she couldn't understand that, so she went to a storytelling conference. And she came back, she said, you're right, they don't have dates on them. I said, yeah, I'm not going to say this happened in 1871, because these stories told orally, they're timeless. You don't put a date on them. But just that little bit is hard for them to understand until they understand the culture a little more. And that's what I was trying to do, is have them understand the culture.
Okay, now let's get into the depth of your materials for both of you. You're both adventuresome people. Your bios, if we take out the horror part of your bios, John, you're a rock star. You were part of what became a very famous group. You've written for movies.
I was never in a group that got famous. I played with famous people.
Okay, close enough. But you're a rock star. You've written the musical version of one of my favorite adult movies. You have done some amazing work. And Owl, you were in the military. Am I correct? I don't have your bio in front of me. You were in the military.
I joined at the age of 17 to see the world, because I grew up in a small town. I was in the country. The closest town was 1.5 miles away, and it had 1,200 people. It had one four-way stop sign in the whole town. I knew I had no chance there, but if I stayed, I'd get in trouble, go to jail, etc. And there was no opportunities. I was poor. So I joined the military, and at the age of 17, a month after I turned 18, I was in Madrid, Spain, loving life. So yeah, I wanted to see the world, and I wanted to travel.
So I'm in the presence of two adventurers. I came from a very cloistered family in the Bronx, and don't even get me started about what age I was when I finally learned about all the things that you guys just go, yeah, I did that at 12, I know. How did your lives and how you lived them influence your stories? You know, you say, write about what you know. Well, how did what you knew changed your stories or altered your stories?
Well, with me,
go first. Go for it, man.
Go get them.
Well, with me, my writing is my entire life's always about proving myself. I was born with birth defects, had a long history of medical problems. I got picked on in school, and I got over the health issues when I turned like 16, 15. And to celebrate, I actually streaked the high school graduation. You know, that I did one of the things. I wanted to prove myself. First airplane I ever flew in at the age of 16, I jumped out of. Writing, to me, is why I drive my agent nuts, because once I became successful in short stories, I quit writing them. And I went on to children's books. Once I got successful in children's books, got nominated for an award, got Storytelling World's Award honor recipient for most tellable tale 8 to 12-year-old, which is a lot to say. Then I gave up on children's books, went on to novels. To me, it was all about proving myself. In the military at 17, I was a sergeant before I was 21, owned my own business at the age of 21, had it for 6 years. And while we were at the business, my wife and I were watching Stephen King on TV. Interview, and she turned to me during the interview and said, why can't you be like him instead of so stupid? And she was teasing. I'm like, all right, I'll show you. I sat down the very next day and started writing. I hadn't written anything since I was a kid. And you write about what you know. I was into martial arts. I wrote a martial arts article, sent it off, and bought it. I said, it's got to be beginner's luck. I said, I'll write one more, and if they buy the second one, I'll keep writing. If they don't buy it, I'll give it up, because it was just a fluke. They bought the second article. I went from martial arts articles to fiction. 10 years, almost to the day after that interview, I was up against Stephen King for Best Novel of the Year for Stoker Award.
Wow. And what made you go horror? Was it just from watching Stephen King?
No, I was raised on horror. When I was 9 years old, my first 50 cents allowance, I bought Famous Monsters at Filmland. And I fell in love with the monsters. Fell in love with monsters and Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft and Ray Bradbury. I was raised on horror. I love it. I still got all the magazines. I still got the models sitting around. Yeah. So I write what I love. I mean, it's one thing to have somebody come up to you and say, hey, I really loved your book. That's pretty cool. It makes you get a good feeling. But when they come up and say, look, man, I couldn't fucking sleep because of your book. It scared the shit out of me. I had to leave the lights on. I love that. That's the best.
That's great. That's right. I remember when I met you, you had a Famous Monsters t-shirt on. And you
I'm
grew up.
still wearing one. I got another one on right now.
There you go. And you're sufficiently taller than I am, so when I met you, it was like hi, hi, and there was Famous Monsters right at the top of my head. Uh, do your characters prove themselves? Is that the since you had to prove yourself? Is that like
Pretty much
a through
so. I
line?
mean, my characters, somebody pointed this out to me. And I didn't realize at the time, but some college professor pointed out, he did a report about my books. He said, you always have a character who's an outsider, who's a loner. I never realized I was doing that, but I was like, yeah, because you put yourself in a book. So every book's got an outside character who doesn't fit in with the group, who's, either out of society, off the reservation, whatever, but he's a loner. They're on their own, whether it's male or female. So I guess that's how I feel. I'm always on the outside looking in. I've been that way my entire life. And even when I'm surrounded by people, I still feel like I'm alone.
Wow. And so your characters sort of you sort of go through therapy, if you will, with your characters.
Exactly. Very much so.
Wow. Okay, John, I've read your bio. I've chatted with you. I've gotten to know you. When I grow up, I want to be just like you. You've had an amazing. You've had quite the varied and fascinating career. How has that influenced in your work? What of you is in there?
Um, well, I mean, almost everything that I've published for the last 30 years, I tried to keep myself as a character out of it as much as possible. In some of the earlier works, I think Deadlines was the last book that had a character that really was speaking for me. The Cleanup also massively, Billy Rowe, the supernatural vigilante, was totally speaking for me. But after that, I was sort of like, what's more interesting than talking about myself? Talking about everybody else. And so I pretty much stopped doing that. That said, this new story that's in Video Palace is extremely autobiographical and walks through my entire life and how horror came into my life. From the fever I ran when I was like somewhere between 2 and 3 years old, where I was hallucinating rat creatures coming down the walls, and they had to actually Jacob's ladder me, throw me in a bathtub full of ice cubes to break the fever. And when the rats hit the water, they disappeared, which basically introduced me to hallucinations, altered reality states, and things that would interest me the rest of my life. I was horrified of horror after that for the next several years. Anything remotely scary just, was basically pants pissing time, or, hide under the table screaming for my mommy time. And then at a certain point, probably about 7 years old, I just went, fuck this. I'm tired of being scared. And I started religiously watching horror movies, Dr. Cadaverino, creature features, and so forth, and fell in love with it. And again, it was like, no, you don't get to beat me. I'm going to, if not beat you, I'm going to meet you there. And I realized that some horror was really amazing and some of it was really stupid, and that was cool too. And then I moved to Argentina as a kid, and saw my first people die within 10 minutes of leaving the airport, and got a firsthand witness of violence and death as it plays out in real terms in countries where the traffic cops carry submachine guns. And yeah, just, watched a shoeshine boy get beat to death by 2 other shoeshine boys on a train platform with his own wooden shoeshine kit, because he was cute, and the American the American business people or military people like to get their shoes shined by him, so they beat his brains out. There were brains on the fucking platform. I saw so much death, and I learned a healthy disrespect for authority. And then I came back to the States, where it was 1970, and all of the music that I had grown up loving. There was a friend of mine in Argentina whose older brother was going to college in Berkeley, and he would send care packages of Jimi Hendrix and Frank Zappa and Jefferson Airplane and all this crazy stuff. So I was totally ready to come back to the States and get psychedelicized, which I promptly did, and threw myself instantly into anti-war, anti-Nixon demonstrations and blah, blah, blah. I got tear gassed at the age of 14 and et cetera, et cetera. And then creepy magazines and during all of that, in Argentina, I was reading creepy magazines and Alfred Hitchcock anthologies and the Pan and Fontana books of great horror stories. So I was totally getting dosed in the classics again, the Bradburys and the Guy de Maupassant and you know, just all these amazing writers, Robert Bloch and Lord of the Flies, which totally correlated with what I was experiencing in a country where you could be walking down the street and then have your brains beat in, unlike any other country I know. And so, yeah, all of that stuff deeply influenced the kind of person that I am and the ways that I wanted to express myself and the reasons for doing it. I love, Al, that you do fiction that has a moral point, that has a lesson. I feel like because horror is the fiction of worst case scenarios, what you want to do is address the damage and tell truths that help people negotiate this life and maybe come through it wiser and stronger. And that has always been my personal mission statement, was to say shit that meant shit and that would count. And I feel like horror, if horror didn't exist in the world, I would have no reason to write it. I would write nonstop puppy stories. I happen to love dogs. But given the fact that we live at least one half in walking nightmare shadow, addressing that stuff seems like not only emotionally inevitable and creatively satisfying, but like my fucking job. And so, as you may have noticed, I have strong feelings about this, and they are all rooted in my experience of my actual life. Yeah, you write about stuff you care about. If you want to write anything that means anything, you write about what you care about. You write about what matters to you, and you attempt to communicate the best truths you have access to. And also, this goes back to the whole thing about not just writing about myself, but really trying to understand other people. I write horror fiction. When I write horror fiction, one of the primary jobs of horror fiction is to understand the monster, you know? So you got to understand the monster in yourself and in everybody else. And then you got something to fucking talk about, you know? And then you can talk human to human and monster to monster and meet in that place where understanding is possible.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that masterclass. And I'm not being pithy. It's really brilliant, really insightful. You've both hit on these points that the world, who doesn't feel like an outsider at some point, and who doesn't feel like we're up to our assholes and assholes. And let's not get even started about these days. So to meet the monster face on, well, that's chilling, and that's really brilliant. Now, in terms of your monsters, for both of you, and this is my last question to you, in terms of your monsters, Wes Craven made a whole series of movies about the math of making a horror movie. What's your math in scaring an audience? When you write, you know, the things, how do you know what you're writing is chilling? How do you know if you've succeeded in the point you tried to make? What's your math Al, what's your math in turning those outsiders and those monsters that enjoy to kill toward us?
Well, the first thing when I'm consciously writing, the characters that are going up against the evil, the monster, whatever it is, you have to care about them. I mean, you have to be able to relate to them somehow. Problem with a lot of horror films, when you have the teenagers run in the woods and get slaughtered, is you could care less if they die. I want to make you care about the people. I want people to see themselves and familiar in the characters. You got to, you know, if you introduce a family and some terrible crap's going to happen to them, you got to care about his family, whether they got good points or you got to make them human. You got to make them real. You got to put, because your reader, you got to, when that reader's reading the book, you got to make everything else around them disappear. You got to make their room, their home. They've got to be into the story. They have to care about the characters. It has to be something they can relate to. I mean, I started out Crota with a kid on a motorcycle going down a gravel road and his motorcycle conks out. A lot of us have experienced the situation of being on a lonely road at night and you hear something in the brush, even if it's a rabbit, it sounds 10 feet tall. That fear of the unknown, the fear of the dark. These are things that have been in horror stories for centuries. The beyond the campfire. You have to make them care. You care about the characters. You got to put them in a very realistic situation so people can relate to it. I can't write about billionaires living in castles because nobody's going to relate to them and nobody's going to care about them. But you got this family, something a normal everyday family. You got kids and stuff, things that people can relate to. They got a dog. By the way, if you're an animal lover, don't read my stuff because if there's an animal in the story, it will not make it to the end. I do it on purpose because I get more hate mail for killing a dog or cat than I do for killing 100 people. That's why I put it in there just to upset readers.
Yeah,
People care about it.
Dog alone.
Yeah, people care about the animals. That's why I put them in there. Puppies, you know, they go, why do you kill little animals? I go, because they scream louder when they're dying. You know, I mean, it's
Oh my God.
They got better projecting, better rating. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the main thing. I want them to care about it, and then I want to make it not so far-fetched. Something you got to make it believable. And if you got a monster, it's unbelievable. Then you surround them by the believable, which makes it more realistic.
That is exactly right.
It's so funny you say that about poor animals. When I watch horror movies, I just have it in the back of my head when I see this. But my wife can't watch a horror movie with me when there's suddenly a dog that comes on in the scene. She knows that dog is going to get eaten somewhere. We were watching one of the opening episodes of Walking Dead when it first came out. And when you see the horse there, she said, the zombie's going to eat the horse. I can't watch this. And she had to get up and leave. So I guess I got to warn her.
What a horse-eating scene that was.
Oh, man.
Just astonishing. When the crane moves up and up and up until it just looks like ants are swarming it. It was so phenomenal. You know, I may have taken a shot at The Walking Dead because of all the money that they've made, and George didn't see a dime of it. But I kind of love that show, and I kind of love that it exists. And again, have friends involved in it that I'm very proud of for having accomplished this seismic change in horror television, because it really is. It's the first great monster soap opera, and I'm really proud of it. You know, not counting Dark Shadows.
Love that Dark Shadows.
Right?
It's funny you say
what
about
was the question again?
It's funny you say about Walking Dead. I had the pleasure of chatting with Scott Wilson before he passed away.
Oh,
what a lovely man. And I tried to make him laugh. And I said, so what's it like working with the dead? And I thought he'd just, that's very funny, or something like that. He puts his arm around me, and he's like you. He just towered over me. I felt so inadequate once again. And he says, son, let me tell you. And he told me all about zombie training camp, that all the actors who play the Herd, they go through character work, and Al, it's similar to what you're talking about in terms of your characters. They had to be real. They couldn't just be, did they die? Did they get bitten? Were they dug up? How long are they dead? Were they decomposing? What's going on in the rest of their brains? And he ended by saying, and when they come at you after all of that character work, you're scared.
You're scared.
So it's fascinating, and you talk about caring for a character. John, what's your math? Your stories are varied and frightening, and And like you say, that you're showing us the monsters in us. What math do you use? What do you prepare to do when you sit down to write a story?
What do I prepare to do?
What do you prepare in writing the story? What's your
Um,
math?
um, I want to know what story I'm telling. Um, I'm a big believer in pre-production. I feel like I know a lot of people like to wing it, to sort of freeball it, but I'm like, um, it's really hard to hit the bullseye when you don't even know what the fucking target is. So if I'm going to commit to writing a story, I want to understand it first. I want to do research. I want to think about who the kinds of people are that will inhabit it and why. What is it about these particular people that suit them to this particular challenge? What lessons do they have to show us or to learn, or um, you know, be wetly, meatly dispensed with? Um, and then I just go in and try uh, to kick my own ass. And if I can kick my own ass, the odds of kicking anybody else's increase diametrically. And if I'm not kicking my own ass, it's not working and it's not good enough. And I go back to the drawing board or I throw it out. But generally, I don't even get on the road unless I feel like I can go there. And it really is. It's like drawing a map uh, for the road trip that I have planned. Then you actually write the thing, and that's going on the trip. But without drawing a map first, it's sort of like, well, I'm going to get in my car and just drive, and whatever the fuck happens, happens. And I don't trust that as a methodology. And I think that's why so many stories um, never make it past the halfway point before people drop them before the writer just gives up on it. And why so many endings are unsatisfying endings because you didn't think that through. I think telling a story is like telling a joke. And if there isn't a fucking punchline at the end, then you just wasted everybody's time with this long, elaborate thing that just sort of like a stick of dynamite in an old Warner Brothers cartoon. You light the fuse, and the music is all like na 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 na, na and then it goes right. And so, yeah, I mean, um, if I'm going to go in there punching, I better know what I'm punching and why, and I have better work on my fucking swing.
So you build the town, you build the people, you build it all, and then you attempt to scare the shit out of yourself.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. If I'm not scared, it ain't scary.
That's great. That's great. So especially after all these years, and actually forget about that. After all the horrors you've seen in your life, if your stick is here, if you're not afraid, well, then that's that. And especially if you are afraid, imagine how the rest of us feel.
Yeah. I mean, if people, there are all strata of potential experience. There are some people just want comfort food, and they just want a familiar story told the way they understand it, and that's all they really need. They don't want to get punched in the head by this book. I don't blame them. That is not a reflection of their moral character or soul development or anything else. They don't want to go there. Some people are like, yeah, I dare you. Some people need to prove themselves, want the challenge, want to be confronted, see something in the darkness that they feel like they want to understand. And if you go into the darkness, there's shit in there with teeth, and it will find you. So, if you're willing to go in there, you're taking that gamble. Now, the great thing about art and fiction is that you can take that gamble without actually having your limbs ripped off and stuffed up your ass. You at the end of it, you get to go, wow, that was intense, as opposed to, wow, I'm dead. And, you know, there's little differences that count. But um, yeah, when I'm writing horror, I tend to go in to to make a mark. You're probably going to walk out with a scar or two, you know, and consider it a badge of honor. And then when that's not the, you know, because the other thing is, a lot of what makes a horror story good is the same thing that makes any other story good, which is people you love, sadness, joy, hope, a sense that we can get through this. Um, and those things are hugely important too. I don't, as a horror writer, like to take people down to hell and then just drop them there and go, see you later, asshole, because that makes you a dick. You know, fuck me if I do that. That's a terrible thing. So yeah, if you're going to go down there, I'm going down there with you, and I'm coming back up with you, because that's how we survive. Yeah, I mean, you ask me, I could talk all day about this shit. I'm sorry.
That's great. No, no, please, please. Again, fascinating from both of you. It's interesting. You both in different ways talk about our primal urge as, you know. Yes, okay, we're these elevated people now, but the primal urge, the urge to step into the darkness, the urge to see the ancient monster that's in our psyche, that's in our spirituality, is still there. Sadly, we have no place to put it, so the world becomes a really awful place. Well, maybe if people read more horror stories, maybe they wouldn't want to do those horror stories.
Unaddressed damage is its own damage indeed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And maybe if they read more of your work, maybe people would get it out comfortably. They'd leave with a small scar as opposed to, oh, don't get me started. Gentlemen, it has been an honor to speak to both of you. It's I'm not kidding when I say a master class. What I've learned about the industry, what I've learned about the art of it from you two just in this time is so important and absolutely priceless. Thank you so much for being part of this.
Thank you so much, man.
To speak to you.
Great to see you all.
Good to see you, John.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions for John Skipp or Owl Goingback on their works on writing horror or any of those fun and gruesome topics, send an email to jmcommet@gmail.com. That's jmcomnet@gmail.com. The Phoenix FearCon Film Festival runs 3 months from October to the end of December. So there's plenty of opportunities for me to talk to these brilliant gents and get their answers to your questions, whether it's business or art. And then we will talk about that on the air. So if you have anything you want to add to them, again, and speak to them, is jmcommet@gmail.com. From all of us at FearCon, thank you both so much. Pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Great to see you,
Bye
man.
now.
Take care.